Hello, and what a great day to sew something wonderful. I'm Kia with Kia B, and today we're going to be working on a little project of binding. A few weeks ago, out of just some extra jelly roll strips and the binding tool, I made a little table runner. Here's what it looks like. I've already quilted it and put a back on it, and today it needs a binding. Now, binding is something that quilters can be a little scared of, and today we're going to work on an easy way to do that using the binding tool. Now, if this is not something that you have, you can place an order online at Fat Quarter Shop or Missouri Star Company, and you can pick up one for just a few dollars. So let's dive on in and take this one stitch at a time. Materials that you'll need for this project are your quilts. So mine's just this cute little table runner that I made out of some scraps. You'll need a coordinating thread. I'm just using white Aurifil thread. I believe the number is 2024. An Olfa rotary cutter. I'm so excited to try this one out. They just sent this to me. This is an endurance blade, and so it's supposed to last a lot longer. I'm really excited to put this to the test. You will need a binding tool, and like I said, you can pick this up at a couple of quilt shops or a couple of places online for just a few dollars. You'll need your fabric for your binding, and then you'll need a cutting mat and a ruler. So here's the project that I'll be binding. It's just a little table runner. What I did is I had some leftover jelly roll strips, and I used our binding tool to make kind of this braided effect. I think it turned out really nice, and I finished it in just an afternoon. Absolutely love it. So what I did was I put this together, added a border around it, went ahead and quilted it on the diagonal, added a turquoise backing, and now we're ready for binding. So first things first, you'll want to lay out your binding and cut it in 2.5-inch strips. That's just typical binding. I do not do mine on the bias unless I have a curve in my quilt, and so for this it's just really straight and simple. So I will use my cutter, which cuts like butter, I might add, and cut 2.5-inch strips. Something you can do to know how many strips to cut is very, very simple. 2.5. There you go. You can measure the two longest sides of your quilt project, and then measure the two ends. Add those together and add about 20 inches. That's about how many strips that you'll need. So I'm actually going to cut about 5 strips for myself. I always like to add extra just in case. I would rather have way too much than not enough. Okay, we'll move that extra out of the way. The next thing you'll want to do is open up your strips. Now, I haven't pressed these or anything else yet, so I want to cut off all of the selvages. So what I do is I just stack them right on top of each other and just chop. The thing I love most about quilting is that it can be tailored to any person. So it's really what works best for you. With our last video, you know, some people don't use that kind of scrap storage, and that's okay. That's the great thing about quilting, is it can definitely be tailored to what you need. Okay, so I've got my 5 strips doubled, so that's 10 pieces of fabric. Let's put this endurance blade to the test. I'm going to just cut off all of the selvages here. So it's 10 layers or 10 pieces of fabric. Let's see. I did not even notice a difference. I noticed a huge difference in the blade. I just didn't realize I was cutting that much fabric. So this blade is really nice. So this is from Olfa. It's an endurance blade, and this is their Splash rotary cutter. Next thing you'll do is head over to the ironing board, and we'll press these out. So now that all of my strips are pressed straight, let me show you how to join them. So you'll take 2 of your strips, and you'll just repeat this for as many strips as you have. Take 2 of your strips. With right sides together, you're going to put them perpendicular to each other. So just like this, and stick a pin right in the center on the diagonal, just like this. You are going to head over to the sewing machine, and you're going to sew from corner to outside corner. Then after you get done with that one, you'll flip to this one. So this is the wrong side, this is the right side. You'll grab another strip you will put right sides together just the same. Add another pin, and you'll just keep going all the way until all of your strips are joined together by pin. Let's head over to the sewing machine and I'll show you exactly how to sew these together. So what I'm going to do with these is just sew from corner to outside corner. Okay, let's head back over to the cutting mat and I'll show you how to cut these apart. So here we have some binding sashing. I mean, look, it's just fun. You can hang it up for a party, but we're actually going to cut this apart. So you'll take some scissors that you have and you'll cut your stitching. Just be careful. There we go. Okay, now you'll want to take some bigger scissors. I like these ginger ones. And you're going to cut 1/4 inch away from your seam, okay? About 1/4 of an inch away. Be very careful because you are using your scissors now. Doesn't have to be exact, but you do need to have a good seam allowance to be able to press open your seams. Okay? And you're just going to go and do that for all 4 corners. Okay, so now with a really hot iron, you want to look at your settings on your iron. Mine's set on high for cotton. You're just going to open and press these seams. So I like to kind of fold them like they normally are and then just lay my iron on top to press. That just sets those seams. Now I'll open it up and I'll press open. And I'll move on to the next one. Now that you have all of your seams open, you will want to fold in half, wrong sides together. You're going to do this for your entire way down your binding strips. Now remember, with the fabric, you don't want to stretch or distort the shape of the fabric or the fibers, and so you just want to set your iron on, pick it up, move it to the next area, set it down, pick it up, and keep going that direction. Let's take all this back over to the cutting mat and sewing machine. Now that I've got all of my binding pressed in half, I spun it around this binding baby. So this is just a wooden spool, and it's made by a company called Doohickey Designs, and she does an absolutely beautiful job. And so you're able to take your binding, slide it in between the spool and wrap it around. This has a hole in the bottom as well that will allow you to set it on the top of your sewing machine so that all of your binding's not draped all over the floor and getting all tangled and unpressed. So this really helps. We did an unboxing video in one of our previous videos, and I just think she's absolutely adorable. So I'm going to use this today. So I've just wrapped all of my binding around her, and then I'm going to slide over my quilting project. Now, to be able to use the binding tool, there are instructions on top of it. The first one is that you need a 12-inch opening and a 10-inch gap. So what that means is you need a starting and a stopping point on your quilt project for when you start your binding, when you stop sewing on your binding. That will allow us to use this tool. So in order to do that, we need a 12-inch 12-inch gap between the start and stop. So I'll just pick somewhere that's kind of far away from the corner. So here's my corner, and I'll go down about 12 inches if you have the room, and I'll place a pin. Doesn't really matter where, it's just preference as long as you can sew out of that corner. Now I'm going to measure 12 inches and put a pin at 12 inches, which is about right here. So I'll show you. Here's my start. Here's my stop, and here's my start. So now I'll head over to the sewing machine, and this is where I'll start sewing on my binding. We'll sew it on the back of your project so that you wrap it around and you finish with a nice straight stitch on the front. Okay, here I've got my binding baby. She's got all of my binding on it. I'm just gonna set it on one of the spool hooks on the top of my sewing machine, and I'm gonna let the binding drape down. Just like this. So the purpose of her is that she holds all of your binding so it's not all over the floor. And then when I put my project in like this, I'll start my project here at the pin that I've placed, and she holds that on. Now the other thing that you need to know, the other instructions, I said a 12-inch opening, but I also said a 10-inch tail. So what that means is you need to grab your ruler and measure 10 inches of your binding tail. So I'll just grab my ruler here, and I will measure 10 inches away, which is about right there. I'll unwind that much, and I know that's where I need to start, right at that pin. So right there. Now, to do your binding, you'll want the opening, okay, so that opening toward the outside of your quilt. And the reason we do that is because we're gonna flip this over and fold it across the other side, so you're really not going to be able to see that opening at all. So I'll put it under here, and you do use a 1/4-inch seam. That's why I'm using a 1/4-inch foot here. I'm not quite going to sew over that pin. I'm just going just a little bit past that pin. With your foot down, you'll just start sewing a little bit, and then make sure you definitely backstitch. Okay? Then when I feel comfortable, I can take out that pin and I can just zoom down. So I'm going to zoom all the way down the rest of this side, and I'll meet you at the corner. So here we are at the corner. You will want to stitch all the way to about 1/4 inch away from your corner. With your needle up, you'll actually not want to break thread, but turn your project and pull it out just a tad. Now, you've stitched about 1/4 inch away, so you'll want to take your loose binding, fold it up, just like this. Let me get my hand out of the way. Okay. So you want to flip, let me do that one more time. So you've got your binding like this. You're going to flip up and create this great 45-degree angle right there. So your binding should now be parallel with the bottom of your quilt project. Okay? Now you're going to fold it straight down. And this should be lining up just like this. Okay? Let me show it to you again when we get to our next corner. So after you've folded it down, you're just going to place it under the sewing machine, right at the edge, right where your quilt is at the corner. You'll stitch and start stitching all the way down again. I'll show you one more time at the next corner. Okay. So here I've stopped 1/4 inch away. I'm going to pull my project out. Okay, I'm going to take my binding loose here. I'm going to flip it up. So it gives it a great 45-degree angle coming outside of the corner all the way down to this inside corner. So now this should be one straight line. Now I'm going to place my finger here on the edge of my quilt. Okay, where these two meet, that makes your corner. I'm going to pull my binding straight down. So it's going to look just like this. You can make adjustments to make sure that it nests in that corner just like that, okay? Put it back under your sewing machine with all that thread that has come undone. Turn your project, start sewing again. Okay, we're all finished, but don't cut your tail just yet. We need to leave another 10-inch tail. At this point, I've got my binding and my 10-inch tail. I've got my 12-inch gap. So now I can take my binding off of my binding buddy and go ahead and snip the tail. So from our instructions, you know we need 10 inches. So I will measure 10 inches from our stopping point. So let's see here, and I will just snip it with my scissors like that. There we go, and I can put my binding baby to the side. So now what we need to do is grab our binding tool, and it's got the instructions laid out very nicely for you right here. Don't be scared. The first couple of times that I used this, I really had to watch a YouTube tutorial over and over again just to make sure I wasn't doing it the wrong way. So what we're going to do is open up your tails. Now this is the pin that I started my binding, and this is the pin that I ended. And you want to make sure and measure here. You want to make sure that this gap is exactly 12 inches. If it's not, this binding tool will not work out the right way. So mine is exactly 12 inches. So we're going to take this side here and line up our binding tool and lay our binding over the top of it, okay? Don't pull it because you'll stretch out the fabric, but not only that, you want to make sure and have a good fit. So what we need to do now is we'll grab our marking tool, and we are going to mark on that line, just using a friction pin here. I'm going to lay it over but not pull. I'm going to mark right on that line, okay? I'm going to open it up here just like this, and I'm just going to carry that line across all the way here. Okay. Now what we can do here is you're going to match this line that you've drawn with this line on the binding tool, just like this. You're going to straighten those out. This can be a little bit tricky, so make sure you stay safe with your rotary cutter, but also stay straight. So I'm going to get in here just like this. Make sure that my lines are matched up. Grab my rotary cutter. I'm going to cut especially this little part here. That will help you line it up later. So I'll cut here and then cut the diagonal there. Just like this. I'll tell you, this endurance blade cuts so well. I'm loving it. Okay, so we've got this side done, okay? So now you want to take and rotate your binding tool 180 degrees like this, okay? You're going to line it up on the other side and do the exact same thing with marking. So I'm going to make sure and mark it on that line. This one, you'll carry the mark all the way over to the side. Just like that. The only difference with this side is you're going to lay your little part here that says A. You're going to line that up with your line. Not the same way that we did the time before. So we'll lay this out here and we'll line it up just like this. And you're going to, with your rotary cutter, very, very carefully, you're going to cut like this. all the way up that side, including that little notch, okay? Okay, so now our ends should look something like this, right? And don't worry, that heat will just remove that right off. Now what you'll need to do, and this is important, you're gonna join these ends together. So remember I said it was important to cut out these little notches. That is what is going to, and it will be a little tight. You see, like as soon as I pull that, my project kind of folds up. That's okay. This is meant to be tight so that it finishes well. So what you'll need to do is with right sides together. So let me show you this again, okay? So here's my binding, both strips cut on the diagonal, okay? I'm going to take each end of those and put them on top of each other. So it's like putting those right-sided fabrics together. I'm going to line up those notches, and I'm going to stick a pin in there. Because this is on the bias, it can tend to stretch, and you don't want it to do that. You'll lose its form. So let me grab a pin and just stick that right in there like this. I'm going to head over to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to sew 1/4 inch all the way down. I'll be right back. Okay, so now we're back and we have our binding all sewn together. It should look something like this, and you'll just snip off the extra threads here. Okay, so you'll want to finger press this open, or you can finger press it to one side. It's totally your preference. So I'll run and do that, and then I'll head over to the sewing machine. And here's what you do with this, okay? You're just going to start where you left off sewing. You'll start stitching and stitch it all the way through to the very end, which is actually where you started your binding. 1/4 inch seam. So just sew, once again, sew all the way down, all the way across. See how I have a little bit of a gap here? It's a little loose. That's okay. When I press this out, it's going to kind of reset that and pull these fibers back in together. And then with my sewing machine, that'll take care of the bulk as well. So I'll meet you back here as soon as I have this finished sewing on. Here we are, and I have all of my binding sewn on completely. The next thing, and a helpful tool that you can use, are called binding clips. If you don't have any, don't worry, straight pins work just fine. So what you're gonna do now, sometimes I like to do this with starch and an iron just to make it that much more crisp. But I like to start at a different place than you started sewing on your binding. This lets this fabric rest for a little bit and not get too distorted. So I'm actually gonna flip it around just to an opposite side. Okay, so we've got our binding sewn on here. What you'll do is you will take your binding and you're actually going to flip it over to the other side. Now you can see on my other side I've got this nice 1/4 inch stitch all the way down. You want to make sure and line up your folded edge right to that stitching. There's a couple of different ways that you can attach your binding at this point. I use a sewing machine to attach it only because I have a hand injury and I can't hold a needle for that amount of time. And so I just feel like I would never get things, quilt projects with binding on them if I didn't use a sewing machine. So that's why I do. It's personal preference. Some people really, really like to hand bind. I just am not able to do that, unfortunately. So what I do is I take it, I fold it over, and I put that folded edge right at that seam line, just like this, okay? And I'm going to stitch as close to that folded edge as I possibly can. So to help me do that, I go through and I actually use binding clips and clip this all on. So what I'll do here is I'll go all the way down my quilt with that folded edge and line it up and put a binding clip. Okay, so see how nice that's going to look. Now I use starch and iron just to kind of set that in place so it helps it guide me through my sewing machine. So I'm going to continue to go all the way around and use my binding clips. Then I'll take my iron and just kind of press this in place. This will help me get it through my sewing machine with a nice straight stitch. Alright, here I am at a corner. I wanted to show you exactly how to do this. So for the sake of you being able to see it, I'm going to flip it over to the right side. Move my tools out of the way. So here we are at this corner. I've just put that last binding clip on. And what we do is when you take it over and you clip, you're going to clip almost all the way to the corner, leaving that folded edge right on that seam, and it's going to make this little pocket here. What you do is kind of like a fitted sheet when you're making a bed. You're going to put your finger on your left hand in that pocket, okay, to kind of smooth that out. So I take my finger and I kind of smooth that out, okay. You're going to push down on that corner. Then I take my right finger and hold it there so it doesn't move, right? So then I pull all my binding to the front on this side, and you just fold it straight over to where now that folded edge sits on that seam. And look how nice it's going to make that corner. So now I'll put it here and keep going around, making my folded edge sit directly on that seam. Alright, so now my entire table runner has binding clips all the way around it. I'll head over to the sewing machine and we will start sewing this on as close to that folded edge as we possibly can. I want to make sure and sew with a 1/4 inch foot, so I've got that on my sewing machine, and then I have a fairly low stitch length of about 2.5. I'm going to go very, very slow to make sure that I'm staying on the folded edge and not too far off. So I'm just going to grab some of my binding and lay it here and just kind of pick a starting space. I want to start a little bit away from the corner, and that way I can come out of that when I'm all the way finished. I'm going to go very, very slow just to make sure that I really am catching that great folded edge that I pressed. The other thing that you could do is a zigzag stitch and make sure to catch the binding and the project. That would just make it look a little bit more snazzy. I'm just going with a straight stitch here. Our project is finished and I am in love with this table runner. It just turned out so cute. This adorable kind of turquoise blue binding all the way around it just gives it that pop of color that I really enjoy. I think it's going to look great on our table or our island at our house. Thank you so much for stitching with us in the hive today as we tackled a scary thing of binding. We hope you all enjoyed this video and you found it helpful. For other tips and tricks, visit our blog, kiabee.com. Thank you so much and have a great day.